Well, thanks for coming and doing this. This is my first podcast with you.
Yeah, it is.
But you probably heard me talk about you before on a podcast.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
As this totally horrible person that's mean to me, my staff, and is always putting unrealistic expectations on us. That's how I try to describe it best. So,
hey, listen, y'all have the potential. I'm just pushing you.
well, to that end, why don't you, although you've been on the podcast before, this is our first time getting to do one. Introduce yourself to anybody that's listening for the first time.
Awesome. Well, my name's Karli Waldon, and I joined Overwatch a little over 3 months ago officially as Chief of Staff, and I'm loving it. Prior to that, I started out in the Air Force as a cryptologic linguist straight off the farm from Boring, Oregon, and did my 6 years in the Air Force and enjoyed every single moment of it. Poster child for how to not transition out of the military, like full stop, and coincidentally ended up into military recruiting, helping people try and avoid the same mistakes that I did. And it just kind of led me on a career path through human resources and executive search and talent development. I recently just came from an organization that called Talent War Group and ran that for 5 years and built a really great business. And it's still going, doing amazing things, but really happy to be here. And with Overwatch, this industry is absolutely it's a foreign language to me, right? And that foreign languages are my thing. That's what I did growing up and in the military. And so it's learning a brand new language and just enjoying the journey.
So to that end, I'm glad that you treat it like a new language because that's what we talked about a year ago when we first met. And I forget, the genesis behind that was the name of the company before it was the Talent War Group was called what?
EF Overwatch.
EF Overwatch. And I happened to be coming, I think I was driving away from Dripping Springs High School, one of my kids at a wrestling tournament, and I saw the sign of Overwatch. And I'm like, There can't be. There's only room for one of us in this town, right?
Right.
So I think Anthony was probably the first one to reach out to you. Does that sound right?
Yep, it is. Yeah.
And then we sat down and we learned that we shared a lot of the same passions, right? You, not only that you're former military, and for people that don't know what your rating was when you were in the military, what are some of the languages that you speak or that you were taught to speak?
What I was taught to speak, so Chinese, and then that's what I went in for, and then got a real crash course in Pashto really quick. So, but Chinese as the primary.
Gotcha. But you speak multiple languages and having the capacity to understand that. I don't even think English was your first language, right? Or was it?
Yeah, I grew up speaking several different languages, and it kind of was like my one given talent in life, and always thought I'd be down that road. So like when I did get out of the military, I was a little cocky, right? Like, oh, you speak all these languages, and I not to offend those on the East Coast, I wasn't a huge fan of the East Coast, and so moved back to the West Coast, and I was like, oh, well, Southern California, like there's a huge need for people who speak Chinese, and at the time I was married to, a gentleman in construction and engineering. I'm like, perfect, we'll have no problems whatsoever. But I didn't prep myself. I didn't have a resume. I didn't really take things really seriously, and so, yeah.
So you got into veteran recruiting.
Total accident.
Yeah. Look, in the group that you worked for is where I started my career from. So for Orion, which was a completely different company back in those days, they did heavily focus on military. It seemed like way more so back in those days. And I was lucky enough to be sitting on an airplane one day coming back from a construction project where I happened to be sitting next to a guy who was flying to La Jolla to do a hiring conference. And he was a submarine, officer, and I was enlisted on a submarine, so we hit it off, and next thing you know, I'm at an Orion conference, and then my career begins, right? So I give them a lot of credit. In fact, years ago, when Mike Starch when he was their CEO still, we had them come to DCAC a few years ago and set up no cost, set up a booth, because my entire career has been focused on. Originally, it started with me trying to rediscover that certain something that was unique to something that we had when we were in the military. Yeah. Which I've been trying to chase to go find as a civilian until I realized that I wouldn't find it and I had to build it myself. But I would use a lot of former military throughout the growth of my career, and I hired a lot through Bradley Morris and through Orion. So when we found EF Overwatch. That was then, by the time that we caught you, you'd already made the name shift to the Talent War Group. Yep. And that is a really powerful company and veteran development, veteran talent. It's you and you had a partner.
Yep.
And he's a very famous Navy SEAL and hosts his own podcast, obviously. And he's in the industry of military. He's a titan.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely.
All right. So, and he's, I've never met him, right? But I've obviously seen a lot of the things that he says and I catch him as I watch his posts. Incredibly inspiring person as well.
Absolutely.
Very dedicated to helping veterans and just building leaders.
Yep.
Right. And you spent a lot of time, not to spend too much time on what you did in the past, because this is really for us to talk about how we met, the impact that you made over the course of time to me by not giving me the answers I was looking for. But, it would be horrible. But I found so much value in that I started chipping away at you, and it took almost, 8 or 9 months to finally convince you to leave where you were a partner at another really successful group that was doing something that we were doing. They were more, in my opinion, doing it more upstream of us. Like they focused more on, I think you guys started with tier 1 assets, and then you started dealing more with like officers or some more senior NCOs maybe.
Yeah, then we expanded it out. It was just leadership in general. Like the philosophy is like the strongest force in the entire world is the U.S. economy, right? And if we could have taken the most trained people, right, in the entire world, which are folks coming out of the U.S. military, and place them into corporate America, then we're going to have an even stronger economy. So that was it. It expanded. And that when you start a business, you start what you know, and then you expand outside of that. So it was to all leadership, but obviously the focus, it was veteran focused.
So we, as a business, started with a purpose, which was to help improve the lives of veterans. But we didn't start with anything else other than that. We just started with a team. And then the business itself developed around the capabilities and limitations of that team.
Yep.
And the diversity in my team, my 2 co-founders are bullet sponges, right? Former Army infantry, one was an officer, one was enlisted. And the optics and how they view the world is completely different than the way that I view it. And this is a fairly technical space. Do you agree?
Absolutely.
And it doesn't lend itself, it's not very intuitive for those that are in this space to just naturally assume that combat infantry people or aviation boatswain's mates or deck div or fire controlmen in the Coast Guard, or you wouldn't think that they would have such amazing impact in this industry. But this industry really lends itself to anybody because it's looking for experience is something that a lot of people look for, but I feel that it's the last thing that they really need because this industry reinvents itself so much that whatever experience you had, although the experience of the emotional pressure testing, it's important, it doesn't really matter because the way that we build data centers today isn't the same as what we did a year ago. And a year from now, it's going to be that much more different.
Right.
But what does bring value is the character that we were conditioned in the way that I explain the value of combat infantry or deck div or aviation boatswain's mates and all the other rates in the military is that they've already come from a mission critical background because instead of measuring, this industry is mission critical, which is measured on downtime. In the military, it's mission critical, but it's measured on mortality. And I feel that the emotional range, a lot of the people coming out of the military is wider.
Absolutely.
And it allows for them to adjust to challenges and adjust to complicated problems faster and easier. And you probably saw that when you were dealing with the leaders of the military.
1,000%. Yep.
So I think that we discovered that there was a lot of overlap. You happen to be in the same town. I know that Anthony was the first one to pin you down and try to pick your brain as much as you want.
We're going to invite a guest into the podcast right now.
He's not having it.
No, he wasn't having it.
That dog's like, not today. So who is this?
This is Fitzgerald, goes by Fitz, and just about the only thing in the world that rules my life.
You?
That owns me.
That dog owns you.
He does.
Yeah, and he knows it too. That's the best part. So
and what Kirk won't say is that he also owns him.
No, we're just friends. I give him bacon. That's why he barks at me. So, but we got into this because you were doing a lot of talent development too,
yep.
Right? So you had grown from a lot of veteran transitioning recruiting, and then you grew into a role in which now you're not just helping transitioning veterans find a new job and a new purpose and a new career, but now you're involved in, when I met you by then, you guys were also deeply involved with leadership coaching, leadership training, leadership development. And that's nothing at all that we were focused on. We were lacking it. We just weren't focused on delivering that as a service.
Right.
So I think somehow we tied you in, and I met you at the first time at Operation Hit, which is a hiring event that we hosted in San Diego, outside Naval Station San Diego. And we had a couple hundred candidates probably show up. The first one of anything that you do is always bloody. And that was a hard one, right? Yeah. And that one, we'll continue to pick those up when we get a better strategy on how to do it, because we know that it was the right purpose. And we know that we were helping change people's lives, and we were giving hope to people that didn't even understand that this industry existed.
Right.
We just need to do it in a better way, right? And in that time where I met you at that conference, we started talking over the course of time, and I discovered that, I was being selfish, really. I was trying to get some free consulting in the sense where I'm like, hey, can I bounce an idea off you? And it probably started a little bit like that. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. It did. 1,000%. Well, first it started with you trying to educate me on this industry, which I'm like, I didn't even know the industry existed.
Nor did you care. You're like, I have my industry. I'm good. I'm set.
No, it was like, okay, this is above my pay grade. Like, this is where the super smart people are, right? And like, clearly. It was just, and I remember very clearly at Operation Hate, like you're like, ooh, you're someone who has information. And I'm like, but let me explain this. And I remember you going, back then, the 5 phases, right? And I'm like, okay, the 5 phases, like that makes sense. And you're talking about, UPSs and all of these things. I'm like, okay, it's going to take me a hot second, but let me see where I can add.
It's just another language.
Exactly.
The reason why I felt really comfortable talking to you about everything is I'm like, I was saying something to you, and let's be honest, you have a big fat brain, and I would embarrass you by saying a bunch of the things that I know about your intelligence, but I know you wouldn't like it. But the thing is I told you, I'm like, no, it's not a technical industry. It's just another language. Yeah. And don't approach it like you have to have an engineering degree. You just have to learn how to sprek in another language. Look, maybe you don't speak Portuguese, but I'm pretty sure if we threw you out of an airplane with a parachute in Brazil, you'd come out of the forest a month later going, whatever that language is, you'd be speaking it fluent, because you do those things to survive. And this industry is just it's another language, and you learn it through immersion. Yeah. Right. And I said, hey, don't try to understand all the keywords and tricky phrases that we use. You come from the military. You understand how quick it is to pick up acronyms. Yep. And this industry is a lot easier, I think, than most people think.
1,000%.
All right. It's just really interesting. And it evolves really quickly because we're in our infancy.
Yeah. And I love it.
You're here during Blue Sky. I call this first generation, this first 25 years of the infancy of our industry, and we're getting ready to hit a tipping point, which brings this industry, I think, more mainstream. You're here during the genesis of the beginning of it. And the first 25 years will be nothing like the next 25 years in this industry.
Right.
And it's still blue sky. And what I say by that is the soup is not done cooking on the means and methods and how we deliver product, because we as the consumers haven't stopped changing the way that we adopt emerging technology. Mm-hmm. So for you, I came to you where I was like, okay, look, I'll make you a deal, because you were curious about, you're a nerd, right? Yeah. So you were curious about things. I'm like, let me get you a deal. Let's go 1 for 1. Like, I'll answer a nerd question for you about this industry, because it's really not that complicated. If you could help me with a leadership question. Yeah. Because I was struggling, right? Yeah. There was one time, I think I reached out to you and you're like, well, look, I have like 20 minutes on a Friday afternoon on the drive back to something. You could call me then. And I think when it was done, you clocked me, and I had talked for 30 something minutes straight. Yeah. And you're like, so how can I help you at the end? And I was like, what a bitch. That's not the response I was looking for. But you just started asking me questions, and you were kind of helping me slow down. Yeah. And start thinking more strategically like a leader. And those are things that you learned in your past life, right? Yep. So at what point did you ever at one point think like, man, this guy's a hot mess. I don't want to be in this industry? Or what point was it where we got you to where, how would you like to come work twice as hard and make a lot less money than you make right now to start over again, brand new? What was it that triggered that?
Sure. So first, we had some discussions early on. I was like, listen, I don't know anything about this industry, and I didn't know where I would be able to provide value. And I just had to understand that, which, as you say, I'm a little bit of a slow drip, right? And so
huge slow drip,
slow drip, right? But I just had to understand a little bit, like, I love the people, like I love the people here, and not to say I didn't love people in past life, but it was just a different type of, atmosphere. And I hadn't had that in a really, really long time. And personally, I'd gone through some things. And so it was like, yeah, this it feels really, really good. But I also need to make sure that I can provide value to this team and not just be another body, right? And so through our conversations, right, and I think it evolved. Like, we didn't know what it potentially would look like. We weren't even having those conversations. But I think over, that slow drip of time, it was like, okay, I think it became very clear where I could provide value. And clearly it wasn't my knowledge within the industry or ability to sprech in data center industry stuff. But no, I think it was just getting in with the team and everyone's so smart and everyone is, experienced within this industry, has all the connections. And it was kind of a new, exciting chapter for me, because where I was is that I had a lot of great connections with people. And one of the things that I hold myself to and constantly evaluate is like, are you comfortable, right? And I think I was like, I'm comfortable and I don't like to be comfortable, right? And so I was like, I think, good people, a great opportunity. Obviously, I did more research on the industry and where it's going. And I was like, yeah, I think this is a great opportunity. And to do it with amazing people. Like, what else could someone ask for?
I think that's interesting, and that dovetails into what we want. Because I remember last night, like, what do you want me to talk? Like, remember last night was the first time, like, what are we even going to talk about? I'm like, really? I want to introduce the concept of what it's like coming into a brand new industry after you've established yourself already at a really another industry that is of great value, right? You were building leaders. And you were helping veterans. And I mean, I think that you guys were working with non-veterans too, right? Yep. But you widened that aperture to be able to help communities and help society in general. And that's what you were doing, is giving people an opportunity to either find a meaningful job of significance that they could have purpose in, or helping them discover how they could grow as a leader, which would enable them to grow within their own business, right? And we were struggling. I was struggling where I hit a plateau and how effective I was as a leader, right? And I knew that. And it wasn't because I wasn't surrounded by other great leaders. I had a lot of really talented people around me. What I learned was I had enough people from inside this industry that could help me. For me to reach the level that I needed to get to next, I needed diversity, right? So the first part of diversity I found was in my CFO, I brought in someone that had he had a very short introduction to this industry, but enough to understand the industry and to be inspired and excited for the industry. And we brought him in as a CFO. And then I brought in who is now our CRO. I brought him in as a guy that has a very successful track record in producing revenue, but not inside of our industry. And the value in bringing him in was the diversity in thought, right? Our CFO brought diversity in thought. Our CRO brought in diversity in approach. I mean, last night, Joe and I were sitting down and we brainstormed 2 brand new ideas that are going to have a significant impact on the way that we improve the lives of veterans and bring more labor into this industry, right? And I mean, I couldn't have done that with someone who would have been limited to the construct of this industry because they knew it so well, and they would probably only think of ideas based on the capabilities or limitations of that construct that's in his head. Yeah. Joe is a blue sky thinker, very creative.
Oh, yeah.
Hilarious.
Don't tell him that.
Oh, I don't. I mean, look, but you got to treat Joe like you beat him. You know what I'm saying? No, but the truth is I needed that, and I was finding that, and then I realized that there was another greater imbalance on my leadership team. And it's not like, I wish that I could in this industry today be like, half of my staff will be men and the other half will be women, but there's just simply not enough diversity to pull through to really have a good team based on those limitations. So what do we have to do to solve for that? We needed to inject more females into this industry. I needed diversity in someone, again, from a leadership perspective that could come into a brand new industry without understanding the limitations and be willing to look at it from the outside in versus the inside looking out. Yeah. And then what we realized when I brought in an EA for myself, because I would start working till 7 o'clock every night, and then I learned that I was working till 9 o'clock every night, and then I'd work until 11 o'clock every night, and then eventually on Friday nights I'd get done putting the family to bed, and I'd be working till 1 or 2 in the morning, and I realized that I was no longer able to get caught back up. Yeah. So I needed the cycles and bandwidth, and we brought in Solmi, and Solmi was the first time that we had the opportunity to see what it was like to bring in someone from outside the industry, a female, and what it would be like for her to sit around all of us, which is the island of misfit toys, right? We're all different. Like all humans, we all have emotional ranges that are different. We all think differently. We have a different emotional response to everything because the conditions of our circumstances of youth. And I want you first to talk about what it was like coming into this industry as just a new person to a brand new industry, knowing that this is the Wild Wild West. This is, you're working with, and you've got to meet, the Peter Grosses of this industry, which is the Henry Ford of our industry, along with the Christians and there's other people that you get to meet. But this is a really young industry that's not even mainstream yet. Right. And what was it like coming into an industry that's not heavily regulated, but you understand that every other industry's growth is directly tied to and proportionally tied to our growth as an industry. And no other industry can grow without our growth because the limitations that technology places on evolution, right? Right. So what was it like first coming into this industry? Because you are a really slow drip. It almost took a year, right? It took at least 9 months, and I probably was running at you for 6 of those months, right? And you were like, I'm good, but I'll help you. Mm-hmm. I'm good, but I'll help you. And you did. You helped me de-escalate a lot of things that happen. I think Crosby once told me the loneliest job that you'll ever have is that of the CEO. And if you're not in the fetal position on a Friday every now and then you're just not pushing yourself or your team hard enough.
That's fair.
So it'd be the Friday afternoon calls when I'm in a fetal position where I'd call you and be like, listen, I have a question. And it wasn't even a question. It'd just be a vomit statement. And then you'd be like, well, how can I help you? You know what I'm saying? But what was it like knowing what you were coming into from this guy being the dashboard that you had to deal with sometimes, right? And then what was it like once you got here? So walk us through, what was it that got you here and both sides, right? Because there's a social dynamic and chemistry of which team you want to play on, where do you want to park your passion and your talent? But also, how did you know that this industry was worth investing your future into?
Sure. Well, let's start with so initially, I think before any of this happened, I went to like 3 or 4 industry conferences, right? Definitely the odd woman out. And like those conferences there's people chasing people who can spit out POs and stuff like that, right? So I wasn't like but I was like, okay, this is a really tight-knit industry. Like these people have this on lockdown. These relationships have been here for a really long time. And to be part of that, I'm going to have to do something really special. And I didn't know exactly what that was. It was obviously a little helpful having some of the connections like with you and the team and whatnot, and to expand that network a lot faster than any other new industry I would have gone into. But I'm a little bit of a destructive person, or disruptive. It depends on the day, right?
Oh, I know.
Yeah. And I have constantly challenge the status quo, and like my folks will tell you to this day, right? There's a few premature gray hairs they got probably because of me. But I never wanted to settle with just like, this is how it is, and this is how we've done it, and this is how we're going to do it moving forward. And tying that into where I could add value, I was like, okay, so there's some really great people who they're on the struggle bus on maybe, X, Y, and Z, which is where I can come in and help and provide value. And then it's something new. And the way that Overwatch is going about it was disruptive. And I'm like, I really, really like that. You tie in my experience with the veteran piece, right? I was like, that's what I bring in to the table. And, the people side and developing people, like there was also, it wasn't just you identifying that, hey, our team needs something. There was also a huge appetite for it as well, right? It is like, I've gone into organizations where upper management has said, hey, my team needs this. You go get in front of that team and you can tell you are not welcome. They don't want it. They're stressed. You don't know all the problems that these people are going through. And a lot of times it's the leadership at the top that's a problem, right? And but there was such an appetite for that. And I was like, okay, great. Not that I always need to feel welcomed or anything, but I'm looking at my odds of like, if I'm going to be able to be successful and get this team from those various points to where, the organization needs them to be. And I saw that. And so the industry itself is just like, it's limitless at this point because we're talking about it's a blue sky. It's not defined. It's not mainstream. I'm not a mainstream person, right? And so I think it just fell into place in identifying some of the opportunities and gaps. We're talking about like the labor force and that gap there. I'm like, hey, well, I have something to add there. And we, obviously we have a passion around, helping transitioning veterans and whether that's they get into this industry, hopefully that's what we want, or just in general, we want them to be successful. And hopefully we can teach them, to avoid the mistakes that we made, right? Or if they do have those mistakes, they can clear up from them a lot faster than we did, right?
Yeah, I mean, this industry is starving for talent.
Yeah,
and you have veterans that are. We just talked to a good friend of mine yesterday, right?
Yeah.
He's a retiring Master Chief, 29 years on the pond, been a Cobb, accomplished everything you could accomplish in the military as a senior NCO.
Yeah.
His first real job in his life was the military. 29 years later, he's coming out, and it's the first time in his life that he's had to figure out what he's going to do with his own career instead of Uncle Sam telling him what he's going to do next.
Yeah.
There's so much anxiety that goes on to these veterans, even if they just did one tour and they're getting out. Most time, they're just going to go back to where they came from, or maybe they're going to go back to school, or maybe they're going to go work for an uncle or an aunt or a friend who's a friend who got him a job back in somewhere. But the truth is, this industry didn't know how to recruit for people to come into it. But in spite of itself, it did discover that there was a fair amount of veterans that were falling into this industry on by themselves, like on accident, or through the veteran network, which isn't all that active, to be honest with you. It's not as strong as you would hope. And you would think that with social media, it'd be like, oh, we could connect the dots to anything right now. Not true, right? Mm-hmm. So we started with, I said, hey, look, I personally need some help, and you're helping me find coaches. You're like, hey, I could find you somebody, or I could do this or that. And before we even got to that, I was also asking you to help us a little bit on strategy. I'm like, hey, we have a recruiting business, mm-hmm. and we have the right intent.
1,000%.
Poor execution, right? And I say that to all the people that work for us, that like they have to feel the ripple effect of every poor decision or every bad decision I make as a leader, because then it has a ripple effect all the way downstream to them. Just like them, they have the right to be wrong and make mistakes. I'm going to forgive them and give them grace as long as they don't continue to make the same mistakes twice.
Right.
As a leader, I just ask for the same grace. I'm like, hey, we're all in this together, so I'm going to make mistakes and take the business in a direction or that direction with the right intent, which is what we govern ourselves by. But we may have poor execution on that because we still need to learn how to come around the horn to make something more profitable. But we can't just do things that make us feel good if we can't pay the bills to keep the lights on. So we have to find that healthy balance. So at the same time, knowing that you were an expert in veteran talent sourcing, talent acquisition, and recruiting, as well as development of leaders, mm-hmm. right? So I'm like, okay, well, look, I have an amazing team of people that in some cases, as you've known, there's a lot of people that have worked for me for 2 or 3 jobs, 2 or 3 different careers.
Yeah.
I have people that work for me for a dozen years or more, or I've known them for longer than that at least. And like I said, I hit a plateau. And I realized for me to continue to grow, I need to coach myself. I need to have someone who could help push me from the outside. But at the same time, if I'm not strong enough to grow fast enough to be able to help raise the ceiling for them, then I need to bring in someone who can.
Yeah.
So that's when we started talking. And did you have apprehension or fear about the industry? It sounds like you spent 9 months getting to know my team. Just, hey, if you were in town for other things that you were doing, I'd be like, you pop over and have dinner with the team at the compound or something, right?
Yeah.
So we were slowly
getting to know each other. We were sniffing each other's rear side, figuring it out.
Yeah, I mean, because you're very we're the opposite. You and I could not be more opposite. Would you agree?
Right, that's pretty accurate.
Right. So I'm like ready, fire, then aim. And you're like, listen, aim 5 times, make sure you check the aiming right, and then you fire 1 time. And that's the right way to do it probably, but that's just not the fun way to do it.
There's a balance. Like we definitely balance each other out. And I think every once in a, like we have that balance, and every once in a while it's like, I think we drive each other nuts, which is so healthy, right?
Yeah, you have to have healthy friction.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I needed that. You were already helping me, by giving me better questions to ask myself. Like I remember one time calling very red ass about one of the guys on the team, and I was ready to go chomp her sick balls, right? And you're like, well, did you ever tell him or ask him, did you define for him what success looks like? I'm like, nobody does that. Like, no, of course I didn't do that. Why would I do that? And I realized, okay, so I can't be mad at somebody if I haven't told them what success looks like. So they're doing their best. I just didn't give them enough guidance. Mm-hmm. I didn't set the expectations high enough. I didn't make myself available but where there was, I continuously was learning that the problems that I had with anybody within the business really came back to me, right? And it's like, okay, I have to fix that or I have to change that. Sure. And I learned that. And going back to the industry, you saw by then, by spending enough time with us, that you saw that this industry is, it's not the Wild Wild West, but it's pretty close to it. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. And like, don't get me wrong, like I'm a businesswoman too. Like I ran a business and I saw the opportunity within it, but I'm like, where people are hesitant or waiting to pull the trigger to get into something, like by the time it's worth getting into, it's the opportunity isn't quite as big. And so, again,
the early arrivers. So I still think that we haven't hit that tipping point. So anything on the left side of that arc, we're talking about Malcolm Gladwell talks about the law of diffusion innovation has like the earliest adopters, and then you have the late adopters and the laggards, and you're definitely on the same side of the coin before we hit that tipping point. Right. And I think the tipping point will happen this year. I think this industry will be mainstream by the end of the year, just because of the demand on infrastructure that this industry requires for growth. And it requires us to address something that has an impact on climate and humanity, which is power, right? I mean, that's our entire economy today is based on oil. And I mean, look at all the things that are made with oil that are in this room, including my cup of coffee here, right? Plastic. But
you're welcome.
but the most valuable commodity in the world today, thank you for the coffee, by the way.
Oh, no.
The most valuable commodity in the world today is data. And that's why we live in a digital economy. And I think that it takes, like, you have to rock the machine back and forth a few times before it tips. And I think that this industry has been rocking back and forth between the demand of IoT, or the Internet of Things, and cloud. And today we're at a point, which you're seeing with us front row, that now cloud demand has reached a point where we can't even support enough power to support the growth and the adoption rate of cloud. How are we going to go build the home for AI knowing that AI will have at least a 10x demand on power greater than what we see in cloud? And cloud was 10x of what we saw in the Internet of Things. So it's not really iterative. It's massive, these huge shifts. Yeah. And we're learning, like, hey man, to address power, we need diversity in the way that we think about the solutions. And we as a business on a micro level needed diversity too. So I learned with Salmi's presence. Salmi is, she would sit in every one of our leadership team meetings as my EA, as, proxy and notes or whatever, but she was learning a lot. But what we would learn is the more she grew comfortable with us, the more that she would share her voice of concern. And we needed that because I had a leadership team of a bunch of dudes, right? And we were trying to find ways to get more women in there. And we were failing. Right. I couldn't either find them. I couldn't recruit them. I wasn't discovering them, or once I did, I wasn't able to encourage them to come over here, because who wants to go work for a brand new startup? I mean, you did. You were at a company that you could have stayed at forever.
Yeah. I mean, I started as a startup, right? Like I told you, I'm a businesswoman. Like, if I want something greater out of life, or anybody wants something greater out of life, typically, you have to take risks in doing so.
You have to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, you have to be uncomfortable for sure.
So to that end, it took a long time though to get you. You finally came over, and I originally were like, hey, come help lead the staff.
Yeah.
Like, I know what I'm capable of doing as a leader, and I've hit a plateau, which means they've hit a plateau. Until I'm able to produce at a higher level myself, someone has to help grow these other people. And I've been on this journey for 18 months now, where I've just been in this relentless pursuit of upgrading and up-leveling myself, mentally and emotionally, I should say, physically, obviously, and obviously spiritually. And I think that as I'm getting healthier and stronger, I'm able to have a greater impact on my team. But until then, I couldn't cheat them out of the opportunity to continue to grow just because of my own limitations, which is why I came to you and said, hey, look, you're holding all these people back.
You did. Yeah, you did.
I'm like, do you hate America?
Way to lay it on thick.
I did too.
Yeah.
I like to make sure that I just play at people's emotions and guilt them into things that they don't want to do, right? But And I also didn't want your ex-boss, who's a very famous Navy SEAL, to come and shoot me in the face because I took away one of his best assets, who is a business partner for him.
Well, and so part of that is like, I'm a very loyal person, right? And so, yeah, him and I spent 5 years building that company. And so we had built teams and so I needed to make sure that they were going to be taken care of and that it was going to run smoothly. Not that I was the one that held it all together, but I just needed to make sure.
You build a team, you don't want to abandon them.
Yeah. So I needed to make sure that was in place before I fully committed to something else.
So let's talk, so getting a female into this industry, getting someone from the outside of this industry to come in is a win, right? We don't have enough females in this industry. And I asked you to speak at DCAC, or at least be on a panel last year. You were still at the Talent War Group.
Yep.
And I was like, hey, listen, come be at this conference and get a sense of what it's like. And then look into the crowd and see that there's, sadly, maybe 1 out of 4 people are females. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying I don't know whose fault that is, but it is all of our collective responsibility to make this a much more appealing industry for everybody. Yeah. Because I was learning that the diversity between you and I lent itself for diversity in thought, and with the right platform, you could have a greater exchange of that idea. And that's what had the big impact on our industry, our business. And I remember going to all these meat-eating savages that are on my team that are all great people that have accomplished a lot of great things in their life, and going, hey, this is going to be amazing. You guys ready to hear this? Yeah. I'm going to bring in someone who, one, she's from the Air Force, which no one likes Air Force people, right? And the second part is this person is going to come in and help lead and train, and she has no industry experience. Doesn't that sound like a winner to everybody? And people are like looking around like, is he messing with us? I'm like, we need someone that doesn't have a construct of limitation around what we're capable of doing based on the way they know us or the way they know the industry. Yeah. And you and I had enough conversations where it really forced me, and painfully forced me, to slow down. I got off a lot of phone calls with you where I was like, I can't stand that woman, right? Because I wasn't getting the turnaround I wanted. What you were doing was stopping the momentum of thought I had and forcing me to think backwards against the grain in a way that made me uncomfortable. So then I have to open the aperture in the way that I viewed that question to try to understand it from every opportunity or every aspect or dimension I could. That disruption is what I went to my team, and I remember my team was all freaked out about shit. And I'm going to go, guys, have I changed in the last 6 months? Have you seen an impact in the way that I respond? And they're like, yeah, man. And I'm like, is it for the better? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, well, then where do you think I got that from? Karli helped me. And look, here's the thing. Diversity could come from not just people from the outside coming in, from a female to a male, but we're not the same age, right? You would think that I would have a hard time looking.
And you can't tell, though.
Shit. Right. All that gray that everybody, including you, every day reminds me of.
That's not me. I don't do that.
My thing is, I knew that I'm not used to walking around with people that are so much younger than me, having the ability to have that much wisdom and valuable wisdom for me. But I learned that I could learn pretty far down the stack in age and from any other gender, and they don't even have to have experience in this industry. And that's the true value of diversity and inclusion, don't you think?
1,000%. I remember when you first asked me, I'm full of unpopular opinions, and I don't mean to offend anyone like this, but it's just overall, as a nation, or globally, we got into a trend of just hiring a person because they checked a box. And I had said something to you along those lines of like, I want to make sure that I'm not
just trying to hire a woman.
Yeah, you're not. I was like, I'm not going to be your token diversity hire. And I've seen that happen where it's like, yeah, we're bringing this person on, but they don't really have a voice or a seat at the table. They're not really providing an impact. We're going to put them on our website and just put them in the corner. And that's what I was afraid of. And so in working with you guys for 6 months, 9 months, whatever it was, it's like, okay, that's not what's the case here. Right?
No, we were harming ourselves. We were sabotaging ourselves in the way that we were engaging. One, it was a maturity thing. We just had to grow up as a business. We're no longer, you go from, it's not like you flip a switch and go from startup to enterprise, right? You are an emerging business in the middle of that. And you don't stop being an emerging business until you stop making startup mistakes, right? And we were making them left and right. I have one client in particular, Tammy at Compass, who has a front row seat. Every mistake that we ever made was really amplified under her microscope at the greatest level. Now, the beauty is, and she's going to be on this podcast too, she's a former, she was former enlisted Navy, went to the Naval Academy.
She's impressive. Very
incredibly impressive lady, but she's also very unassumingly impressive, meaning like she could sit in this room and you wouldn't know, that she's significantly influential and intelligent because she doesn't shove that shit down anybody's face. Right. She's, but she also is very objective. And I learned that because she had grace in the way that she would engage with us, because every mistake that we continued to make happened to be in that one account at Compass. And she would be like, okay, I'm scratching my head again, guys. Help me understand. How did you guys miss this? And she held us accountable to a lot of things. And we were always just very honest. I'm like, hey, look, we're allowed to be idiots, right? I'm allowed to make a mistake. We didn't intentionally do something wrong, but we're going to. And what we learned was we just didn't have the right answers. And we needed someone that could view it from another set of eyes, from a different perspective. And you offered that day one, minute one to all of us. I mean, I'm not saying I had a silent protest of resistance from the rest of my management team when I let them know that I'm going to bring on another person to our SG&A that's going to help contribute to the leadership side that had zero industry experience. Because I think that they trust me or believe in me enough to understand that I'm going to do things unorthodox, but there hasn't been a single one that hasn't come to me and been like, greatest hire you ever made, greatest change. And they all have found the power that a strong female leader can make to a heavily male-dominated leadership team by simply de-escalating every ounce of ego that we could ever have, deconstructing the problems from what we emotionally responded to what the reactional, like the reality of truth of the problem is. And then you had answers. You had experience from all the development training that you've done through all the other businesses, because people don't realize you used to parachute into other companies and go help them.
Yeah.
And you did that for a living. And then I was like, why don't you just do that here and we'll pay you for it? Right.
Yeah.
But that help, I mean, you're helping them not just professionally, but from the constitution of the individual. Like it is a lot of us dudes. And that's not because we just wanted to, it's not the old boys club. It's really not. It could look like that to anybody, but
it definitely wasn't. But
we just weren't lowering the bar. We needed people that had a certain level of value that they could contribute. I wasn't going to just have a female on our leadership team for the sake of saying me too.
Yeah.
But we knew we needed one because we figured out how much power Salmi can bring, and she is growing every week and every month.
She's awesome.
In her power, for sure. She's a completely different monster from the one that we hired. But we learned, like, man, if someone with that volume of experience can do this, what happens when we bring on a trained female expert who knows about leadership and cares about our purpose? Our primary purpose was helping veterans, yours too. So it was one of those things where you came on and we got to really first discover the value and the power of true diversity. Mm-hmm. And this podcast was not something I wanted to do immediately when you got here, because we wanted to get some miles under the tires on this.
Yeah.
Until we both agreed, like, this is working. Do you agree that it's working?
100%.
What do you see from your side? Because I do think in time, every management team will find that the diversity that they seek for the purpose of checking a box, they should seek it for the value that it brings beyond the optics.
Right.
Do you understand? Because for us, the accountability that you brought and the way that you removed emotion from bullshit and created objectivity measures for us to measure success from, that was a game changer for us. Yeah. So where did that come from, and what are the other things that you've seen from your side? You don't want to talk about it?
Oh, no, I do. Sorry, he was grumpy.
Yeah, don't make him bite you right now. There it is.
Oh, they might have to edit this part out.
Oh, God. It's fine. It's you, dog.
Ask the question again.
I was saying, like, you saw the changes taking place, right? We were sitting down and we'd have meetings, and then you'd just be like, well, can I just ask a question? And you'd slow it all down, and then we'd like, yeah. And by the time we were all done, we're like, I wish that someone asked us that question before, right? So the diversity in gender was less important. The diversity in thought was the most important. And we weren't doing it to satisfy anybody, but to satisfy the needs of growth that was lacking in this business. We were out of balance.
Yeah.
That's how I considered this leadership team is you don't want, I think that what my leadership team had to offer was a lot of overlapping offsets to each other, meaning somebody's greatest strength was covering the greatest weakness of the man, or the man to the left of them, like a phalanx would move forward, right? So we were offsetting each other's strengths and weaknesses, which would give us a lot of momentum. But then we hit a plateau where we no longer had the ability to grow beyond that. And it's because we were lacking new methods of approach. And that could only come from someone that had a more diverse background of methods of approach. And everything that we had, I mean, all the changes that we made since you've been here have been based on the way that you viewed the challenge or the problem differently than the way that we've tried to solve for it and failed in previous times. So, we've had problems where we've tried to figure out glide paths and growth paths for the females in this world, in our industries, or at least our company, and we failed there, right? But failing doesn't mean that we're not going to keep trying. We're going to eventually figure it out.
It just means that door was locked or blocked, and now we got to go find another path.
Yeah, I mean, we tried. We had the right intent, but we failed. Poor execution. But you saw this void of need, right? And you did that while you were evaluating us over the course of many months, right? Because you didn't want to step in unless there was a need and there was an opportunity to bring your value, right? So walk us through the psychology, because I know what I was looking for and I knew what we were needing and I understand the value that it's bringing already. What were you expecting?
To be quite frank, I never really go into something tied to any specific outcomes outside of making something successful. And sometimes you're going to have to figure out what the strategy is or the plan is along the way when you can gather more information. But my plan coming on board was, typically in the first 90 days is when you're going to have all the great ideas. You come into something new, you're like, well, why do we do this? And you ask all the questions and all of that. And it's really cognizant. I just hit past my 90-day mark officially. And I was like, I don't want that to ever go away, because that's when complacency, sets
we're all
in.
about that.
And so I genuinely, I'm like, I ask questions because this is a foreign industry to me, but it's also, I've seen I had little glimpses of how this team operated together, but in very specific scenarios. They were offsite meetings with the team and its strategy, but the day-to-day, I didn't have a ton of that, right?
Yeah.
And so always just asking questions. I'm like, hey, from my experience, I, would do this. Why are they doing it that way? And sometimes I will find out there's a very specific reason why we do it. I'm like, check, Roger, got it, cool. Yep, that's how we do it. That makes total sense. Doesn't mean that we won't change it down the road. It'll need to be changed, but that makes sense. And then there would be times where you guys would just look at me and be like, I don't know. Well, yeah, why would
Good question. No one asked.
Yeah. So my intent coming in was never to kind of establish dominance by any stretch of the imagination. It was more to seek to understand, and not so much the industry, if I'm being completely honest, of my job. It was around people. And so understanding the people that I'm going to support and work with on a daily basis, and which ultimately transcends down to the people who are in front of our clients, right? How am I going to work with these people who are going to work with, how that goes downstream. And so it was just building those relationships. And I pick up a few, acronyms along the way. And,
it's a new language.
It's a new language, but understanding the people, how they work together, what works really well, what doesn't, understanding what our goals are, right? And what are our gaps, to get there, skill gaps, whether soft skill, hard skill, whatever it is. And then trying to bridge that. You talked about the removing ego piece, and that's not something unique that I bring to the table. I think when you do insert that feminine energy into a really heavy masculine environment, it does change the dynamic in a really, really healthy way. And now on the reverse of that, it can be really toxic too, right? If there's, if it's not balanced or used or weaponized, both the masculine and feminine have strengths, and they also have weapons, and there's weaknesses that go along. And so I think when you have the right combination, right, where we've talked about this before, I'm not trying to be, as strong as a man or anything like that. And I think that's where I probably was able to lower the guard of people. I'm not trying to be the next C blank O or whatever it is, right? I'm not trying to take your job. I'm not trying to do this. I genuinely want you to be successful, which means we will all be successful, which means I will be successful. And so I think when the team realized that, which I would hope, I think was pretty relatively quickly. I would say going from previous experiences, it was pretty quick, right?
There wasn't a lot of resistance.
There wasn't a lot of resistance, which was great, which means
they were starving.
Yep, they were starving. There was that appetite, and we've been able to accomplish a lot in the past 3 or 4 months, right? And it's not because of me or anything that I did specifically. It was just doing some of the things that we talked about with you, right? Of like, hey, have you considered this? Have you looked here? Or just bringing a couple new ideas to the table, and the potential is there. People have the potential, and just giving them the right tools and resources they need to really reach that potential.